If you're just getting into photography or struggling to make sense of all those settings on your camera, I feel your pain. I really do. Exposure, which is how bright or dark your image is, can feel like a complicated mix of numbers, dials, and guesswork. But once you understand a few core principles, it gets a lot easier. I promise. Hopefully this guide will help you. It's based on what should work for most beginner photographers, whether you're shooting landscapes, wildlife, or your kids at the park. Let me start with this. There's nothing wrong with using auto or semi-auto modes like aperture priority or shutter priority. In fact, there are many professionals who use those settings just depending on the situation. But to truly understand how your camera works and to stop feeling like you're guessing every time you take a shot, it really helps to learn manual mode. Manual mode isn't just for purists or professionals. It's for anyone who wants control and consistency with their photography. You see, when you rely on auto, your camera decides the exposure based on what it thinks is best. And newsflash, your camera doesn't always get it right. Lighting changes constantly, and your camera doesn't really know that, especially when it's in a tricky lighting setting. Exposure is controlled by three things. Number one is aperture and f-stop. I'm going to spend a little bit more time on this one because, well, for me at least, some of the terminology was confusing. Aperture refers to the physical opening in the lens that lets the light into the camera. A larger aperture lets in more light. A smaller one, well, you guessed it, lets in less light. Aperture also controls the depth of field. A wide aperture means you're going to get that cool, blurry background, also known as a shallow depth. A narrow aperture means you'll get more in focus or a deeper depth. The f-stop is the number that represents the size of the aperture. It's a ratio like f2.8, f4, f5.6, and so on. Here's the twist, and this is where it can be a little confusing. The lower the f-stop, the bigger the aperture. The higher your f-stop, the smaller the aperture. For example, f1.8 is often referred to as being wide open, meaning it's letting in a lot of light, whereas f16 means a tiny opening with a lot less light. So aperture is the physical feature. F-stop is the number used to describe it. Here's another quick analogy. Aperture is like the window, and f-stop is the measurement of how wide the window is open. All right, so enough on aperture and f-stop. Next up is shutter speed. Your shutter speed affects how long the sensor is exposed to light, which also affects motion blur. And we'll get into shutter speed more in just a little bit. And the third part of the exposure triangle is the ISO. ISO refers to the sensitivity of your camera's sensor to light. A higher ISO equals a brighter image, but also more noise. Noise is what I liken to static. All three settings affect brightness, and also bear in mind that changing one usually means adjusting another. Here's a great starting point for learning manual exposure. First, set your camera to manual mode. This is typically going to be the M that's on the dial, assuming that you have a dial. For sharp landscapes, choose an aperture of f8 to f11. Next, set your ISO to 100 or 200, depending on your camera's native ISO. Each camera brand is going to be different. Then, use your shutter speed to dial in your brightness. When it comes to shutter speed, your camera has a built-in light meter. You'll see a scale in the viewfinder or on the screen. Adjust the shutter speed until the meter is centered. That'll give you a baseline exposure. Now, take a test shot. Assuming your camera has one, look at the histogram, not just the screen. The screen on your camera isn't always accurate. In fact, it's often wrong. But either way, if it looks good, you're probably set. If not, tweak your settings based on what you're trying to achieve. For scenes with high contrast, like shooting into the sun or capturing shadows at sunset, no single exposure is going to be perfect. This is where bracketing comes in. Take one bracket exposed for the highlights or the bright areas. Take a second one that's slightly brighter, and that's for the midtones. And then the third, even brighter, for the shadows. Later on, you can blend them in a software like Lightroom or Photoshop to create a balanced image that achieves that look that you're going for. And if you want another video on how I use Lightroom and Photoshop to get these things all to come together, drop a comment below and I'll be sure to create a video just for that. Oh, and note, bracketing doesn't work well for moving subjects like wildlife or sports. Depending on your subject, you'll prioritize different settings. For landscapes, you'll want to use a tripod, and aperture is king. Start at f8 to f11. Set your ISO to 100. And the shutter speed, it doesn't really matter here unless it's windy. For wildlife or sports, shutter speed is critical. Start at 1/1000th or 1/2000th of a second. Then adjust aperture and ISO to match. And for portraits, choose aperture first, like maybe f2.8 for a blurred background, and then use shutter and ISO to match exposure. And yes, it's totally fine to use auto ISO in fast changing light. Just set a max ISO so that way you can limit or avoid too much noise. Bear in mind that manual mode won't always be the best choice. If you're at an event chasing fast action or shooting in wildly changing light, aperture or shutter priority modes can help you move faster and stay focused on composition. Just be sure to use exposure compensation to adjust brightness without diving into full manual. Now, when it comes to your camera's light meter, well, it isn't perfect, but it's a good starting point. Use it for your first shot, then tweak it based on that look that you're going for. And going back to the histogram, always trust the histogram. Trust it more than the back screen. Trust me, it tells the real story of your exposure far more than what you can see on that small digital screen on the back of your camera. To bring things all together, practice in manual mode during low pressure shoots. Take the same scene with different settings and just look at what's changed. Over time, you'll learn to predict what your settings will do, and that's where the real confidence kicks in and you'll feel better about being a photographer. If you're taking shots of wildlife, sports, portraits, or travel, learn the priority of settings that matter most in each. There is no one-size-fits-all method, but there are smart ways to adapt to each situation. So yes, you can nail your exposure. Every time, maybe not, but more often than not, absolutely. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down, but only if you leave a comment as to what you disliked about it. I just appreciate the feedback. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.